Hello, friends. There's a giant snowstorm outside, so that's fun. So last weekend, I hear that the Oscars happened. I don't know. I've never actually sat through the Oscars ever. I don't think I've ever seen even more than small snippets of it. But that night at the Oscars, the Green Book won Best Picture. And the Green Book is controversial for multiple reasons, namely being that there were other films that people argued would have less of a white savior aspect to them. And on top of that, they discussed the struggle for Black freedom in a way that is much more applicable to our current moment. Actually still shows that hashtag Oscars so white is really still a thing. I think something like 49 out of 51 people who the Oscars are gonna go to are white. And yeah, nothing like the Green Book to be a movie to make white people feel good about themselves. And this is not the first time this has happened either, like with the 1990, I want to say, controversy over the movie Miss Daisy. But that's not what I want to talk about today. Today, I want to use the popularity of the Green Book to talk about the real Green Book, the actual Green Book that the movie is titled after but doesn't talk about all that much. See, if you were a Black person during the time of Jim Crow, traveling was actually kind of difficult. You were discriminated against openly in public transit, back of the bus, or just flat out not being allowed to ride in certain routes. It was very terrible, trust me. Black people had a pretty rough time taking public transit, so one of the things that Black people who could afford to travel did is they started to become motorists. They started to buy cars and travel on road trips. And everyone loves road trips, right? Here's the problem. In the South, in the age of Jim Crow, it's pretty tough to get around. Because of official segregation policies, many hotels, restaurants, and gas stations refused to serve Black people, which meant that you could go very long periods of time with no food, nowhere to sleep, and no gas, which could leave you stranded. Enter in the Green Book, which was published in 1936 by Victor Hugo Green and was published with multiple editions until 1966, a couple years after the passing of the Civil Rights Act. The full title of the book is The Negro Motorist Green Book, and it is a guide to how to travel in the South. It is a list of hotels, restaurants, and gas stations that will serve Black customers. It's actually based on Jewish guidebooks that had a very similar goal published before. But yeah, this was very helpful, and a lot of Black motorists made use of it in order to travel to see family in the South and in order to just get around. The Green Book was a fairly effective guide, and it was extremely popular. The Green Book is just one thing that was used to give people the guidance that they needed to travel in the South. Because remember, traveling in the South while Black was not only difficult and annoying, it was dangerous. You could run out of gas and be stranded. You could be very hungry. You could not find a place to sleep in a sundown town, which a lot of towns in the South were, which is basically that Black people were not allowed outside of their homes after sundown. And so drivers could get pulled over, arrested, just being a Black person and being outside at nighttime. So very often road trips involved staying with family friends and trying to be very careful in coordinating where you went. And the Green Book really, really helped with that. Another thing that you'll find fairly common in stories of Black traveling in the South at this period is preparation. Very often before a road trip, for at least the next day, they would prepare food in order to eat while in the car, not only to save money, but because it's fairly likely they could travel an entire day and not pass a single restaurant that would actually serve them. Very often, they bring camping supplies because they would need to set up camp in order to sleep or to sleep in their cars because there was no hotel that they could stay in. But as I said, this is not just something that was annoying, it was dangerous. Yes, there were official Jim Crow laws, but there were also a lot of unofficial Jim Crow laws that were inconsistent place to place. Sometimes Black people were allowed to do things in one town and not allowed to do things in the other, and the response would be either getting arrested for little to no reason or extrajudicial murder. Lots of Black people were murdered in the South during the time of Jim Crow for breaking laws that don't actually exist. Read the whole history of lynching and how the act of white terrorism on Black people in the South was an omnipresent threat through basically most of American history. So while the Green Book did help, it did not make traveling while Black a breeze. The Civil Rights Act, which banned these Jim Crow laws really turned things around. The last published issue of the Green Book was in 1966, and even by then it had really diversified its interests and was not explicitly about navigating Jim Crow anymore. But even so, it was an extremely powerful 30-year spread, and it went into obscurity after it stopped being published, but historians in the 2000s started to pick it up and take it a little bit more seriously and do a lot more study. And it's shown a fascinating glimpse of material culture and travel culture in the South, in America, for Black people. That being said, I think that we should wrap up the story by pointing out that this is by no means the end of racism, not even close. The Green Book was necessary within living memory. There are people alive today who remember segregation, who experienced segregation firsthand, and probably even used the Green Book and needed to use the Green Book. And today, mass incarceration, which has been nicknamed the quote-unquote new Jim Crow, is still prevalent. In some ways, some counties and some schools in America are actually more segregated than they used to be in the past. Sometimes an all-white suburb will just break off and become its own city rather than let Black kids go to their school. And of course, that's all systemic racism, but, no discussion is complete without the rise of blatant fascism in the recent years that show that, whoever thinks racism's over is pretty deluded. So let's not act like racism is over. I wanted to tell this story because I think the Green Book is a fascinating piece of American material culture that we don't talk about enough, and I wanted to give it some attention. And, the attention that the Oscars are giving to the Green Book was a good excuse to talk about it for a little bit. So, little story there. Anyways, everybody, you have an amazing week. I'll see you next time. Another quick one, because I'm making lots of Step Back Prime videos, so keep in touch with those.